Welcome to the drag racing story of Kenny Vogt. We began Kenny's story with episode number 1, in which he told us of his involvement with the street racing scene on Detroit's Woodward Avenue back in 1959. His passion for racing led to a decision to purchase a 1957 Ford sedan powered by a stock production engine. Kenny's dad worked for the Ford Motor Company, and he introduced Kenny to Andy Houghton of Dearborn Steel Tubing Company. Now, Andy had his staff install a 390 cubic inch engine in the 57, and it was game on. The street racing 57 became a drag race performer, and Kenny's driving skills became noticed by the powers to be at the Ford Motor Company. With the 1965 racing season on the horizon, Kenny would acquire a 1964 Ford Fairlane Thunderbolt that had been campaigned by Bob Ford Incorporated and their driver Len Richter. So let's pick up the story with episode number 2, entitled The Ford Fairlane Thunderbolt, 1965 drag racing season.
To start the 1965 season, Richter was moving into a Mustang with Bob Ford on the side, and they were trying to decide what to do with the Thunderbolt. Well, I had this success with the 57 Ford, runner-up at the U.S. Nationals in the class, Paul Harvey. They said, let's give that car to Kenny. He deserves it and everything. Well, this was great. I had this Thunderbolt that was now, newer, only 1 year old. And that's how I was offered that car to race. And I was able to put my own markings on it by repainting it yellow and lettering it in black. And I named the car Stinger 1 because it was like a bumblebee on wheels, meaning it was yellow and black. And I actually came up with a little logo of a bumblebee sitting between a pair of wheels, and called it Stinger 1. So in 1965, I started racing Richter's old Thunderbolt after I painted it yellow, so it gave it a whole fresh look. It was like a new car at the local tracks, which were primarily Detroit Dragway. Well, I love running Detroit Dragway because the car ran for top stock eliminator each week. And there was always pretty good competition, Detroit being Motor City and everything. And they paid $75 for top stock eliminator. And it was local for me. It was an hour drive to the track from where my parents lived at Maple and Telegraph. And boy, we'd start winning. We'd beat, the Chevys and Dodges and Plymouths and almost every week, to where I had it started like I've won 3 straight top stock eliminators. Then it was 6 straight. Then it was 8 time. And of course, the article would be in the Detroit Free Press and the Detroit News, because they covered drag racing in those days. It'd be in National Dragster and Drag News, the 2 publications that were key in those days. And the articles, and my mother cut them out, and we'd throw them in a box. And I have them to this day, of course. But we would race primarily at Detroit Dragway. It was Sunday at Detroit Dragway. And they would bring in all these top names: Dick Brannon, Dave Strickler, Don Nicholson, of course. And they'd have match races, and I'd be winning top stock and down at the track. And then we started taking the car to other tracks in the area of Michigan, but also started going out of state, down into Ohio, Dragway 42 in West Salem, Ohio, Columbus, National Trails Raceway in Columbus. We'd go over to Reading, Pennsylvania. We'd go up into Canada, Niagara, and down into the south with this Thunderbolt. and had pretty good success. And then we were getting ready for the 1965 Nationals to take the car there, when I noticed an advertisement. They had this ad, $10,000 or $8,000 prize money. I thought, well, it's down in York, US 30 Dragway in Pennsylvania. Where the deuce is this? So I look it up, it's down in some cornfield. Well, I never really raced that far away from home. So, but we loaded up and went down to this, and while I'm in the check-in line, you know, the classification line, all these cars that I've seen in magazines are there. All these, you know, everybody who was anybody was like at the York meet. And what it was the cars that had come in town from California, Ohio, Michigan, all down south. They all converged because of this big payout, and like my friend Bob Taska said, you know, they wanted to get their name in the magazine. This was important in those days, to get that ink, as we call it. And so we all ended up there, and the rest you've covered in your York video, which I recommend everybody see, because that was quite the race, the Woodstock of Drag Racing, it's called.
After reviewing the success of the Superstockers in Action event, Bill Holtz and Monk Reynolds decided to co-promote another Superstock-style race, but this time they teamed up with Superstock and Drag Illustrated magazine to hold an event at York US 30 on August 7, 1965. They called the event the Superstock Nationals, and true to its name, cars showed up from all over the country. Actually, the number of cars and the huge spectator turnout caught the race promoters off guard and unprepared to handle the logistics of the event. But to the lucky spectators who made it to the show, they would forever remember their experience at what has become known as the Woodstock of Drag Racing. A quick run through the pits gives you an idea of just how many race cars there were at the event, and the number continued to grow throughout the day. Gary Dyer was driving the Chicago-based Mr. Norm's Charger in the Unlimited class. That class was reserved for cars that were either blown or running on fuel. Ronnie Sachs, on the other hand, chose to run in the 2,700-pound gas class. He was using injectors, no fuel. Well, making a long-distance tow to York was West Coast Californian Dandy Dick Landy in his older wheelbase Dodge. Also, Dick Brannon with his 4-speed car was running in the 3,200-pound class. And here's Fast Eddie Sharpman in his 65 Comet A-Go-Go AFX car. Notice injectors on the car here. He started out running in the 2,700-pound class, at least he thought so, but he ended up taking the injectors off, put carburetors on, and running in the 3,000-pound class. On the outside in this match is Wally Bell on the ex-Sox and Martin 64 AFX Comet. And hey, just look at that crowd. Kenny Vogt of Dearborn, Michigan entered the Bob Ford Tbolt in the 3,400-pound class, and this is the same car that Glenn Richter drove in 1964. The 3,400-pound class had the largest number of entrants, and Kenny's Bob Ford-sponsored Tbolt had a great showing at the event. The race was being sponsored by the Superstock and Drag Illustrated magazine, and racers towed into York US 30 Dragway from all parts of the country. Kenny Vogt of Michigan was one of the racers at this historic race. Now, back in 1994, I met Kenny Vogt at the 30th Thunderbolt reunion at Milan, Michigan. His old Tbolt was being displayed during its restoration process, and we had a chance to discuss the car and the 65 Superstock Nationals.
1965 Superstock Magazine Nationals, first one.
Right.
This started out as a drag race just like any other event in the country. It was at York US 30 Dragway, York, Pennsylvania. No one was expecting anything great. What ended up happening was a collection of funny cars from across the country, all converged at one time, and we didn't even know we were all going to be there.
And what happened was that started out racing during the daytime, and as you can see from some of these photos, it looks pretty normal as far as the spectator crowd. By late in the evening, there were so many people flooded over the pits, over the stands, everything. They were lining the drag strip the entire quarter mile.
Yeah.
I don't know if the camera can picture it in this particular photo here, but you know how they'd never allow this today. They didn't allow it then, but you can see the people behind the drag cars.
You were doing
every
burnouts
big
for the
name
people, weren't you?
in a, they had to clear the people. Couldn't do a burnout.
Okay.
Well, the way I take that back. You know how typical burnouts are done behind the starting line?
Yeah.
There were so many people, they allowed the burnouts. This was the first time, I think, ever to go in front of the starting line and back up, because there was no room. It was all you could do just to get the car through the people, to get it to the starting line. And you can see that, I think, pretty clearly in this picture.
Yeah.
West Coast cars, Ohio cars, Ontario cars, of course a lot from Michigan. You had Thunderbolts, whatever the latest funny car of the day was. In 1965, it all converged on this spot. It was like, you know, Little Round Top if you saw Gettysburg, you know.
Yeah.
But this was where the battle was held.
Now you were there with your
I was
Tbolt.
there with my Thunderbolt, yes.
Tell us about that car. That car originally was...
That car was originally built by Ford Motor Company to compete against the best from the Chrysler camps of the time and against the 409 Chevrolets. It was set up originally by Bill Holbrook, who's here today, driven by Len Richter. And then back in those days, there was an obsolescence factor. So like the hot setup for 64 wasn't the hot one for 65. So you usually, when you had a factory contract, moved. And you moved from the 64 car into a 65 car. I believe they moved into a Mustang. Well, I had the opportunity to take that car after Richter and Holbrook were done with it and campaign it. And I had, you know, fairly good success at that. And so that's kind of how it evolved for me.
And here is Kenny Vogt making a pass at the Superstock Nationals with his 64 Fairlane Tbolt. As it turned out, Kenny's Tbolt was the quickest 3,400-pound car at the event with an ET of 1109. Kenny's Thunderbolt was also one of the 16 cars that qualified for the Handicap Eliminator title. The Tasca Ford team out of East Providence, Rhode Island ended up winning Handicap Eliminator at the race, and Mr. Bob Tasca Sr. shared his remembrances with us.
I think the best race ever was the race at York, PA. When the Tasca team won that race at 20 minutes to Superstock Nationals. 20 minutes to 3 in the morning, we won the race. Again, I can remember it like yesterday. Isn't it funny, I can remember some things and other things I can't. The crowd had knocked the barriers over, and the crowd was right. They could reach out and touch the car.
Yeah. August 7th.
We could have wiped out 15,000 people. If we ever went off the track, we would have killed thousands of people. And they were hanging right behind Billy, looking at the tack, betting what he'd come out at. What RPM was he coming out? They were laying bets on what he'd come out at. And he had a tack that was lit. And they're right at the back window looking in to see what Lawton would come out at.
Kenny's Tbolt carried the number 57 at the Superstock Nationals, but as Kenny tells us, it was for a different reason.
This time a little different. The reason I used it was my dad was 57 years old. And because of his influence in my racing and the engines, you know, I used that number for him, and of course I'd had it on the 57 Ford.
Kenny's Thunderbolt started the 1965 season with a dual quad setup, but later he decided to experiment.
Everybody's experimenting with, you know, Hillborn injection and doing all these erratic things, so of course Vogt's got to try this, right? So we get the Hillborn injection, the shorter stacks, not as long as like Joniak had and those guys, and we put them on and never could get the thing to run smoothly. So nuts to this, I'm not going to mess with this. We'll just go back to the carburetor situation and stay in that class, because that would have changed my class too.
Sure.
You know, and I wanted to pick a class where these great names and legends are not going to beat up on me.
Yeah, yeah.
You know, I might have beat up on them in my class if they were in my class, but I'm not going to their class.
Yeah,
But no. But at any rate.
And the drive line in the car, you continue to use a 4-speed?
That's correct.
Okay. Well, Kenny took his 1-year-old Ford Thunderbolt to the '65 NHRA Nationals at Indianapolis, and he had a real good outing with the car.
At the '65 U.S. Nationals, because I had a '64 car, it couldn't run in the super stock class of late model cars. It had to be current year, as I recall. So they didn't really know where to put this Thunderbolt, and they put it in C altered class. And a lot of tough competition, you know, because a lot of different type cars. They weren't stock car type looking cars. They were altered type looking cars, and a lot of them very lightweight. But it was, of course, the classification was fair, and we got beat on the final run again at the U.S. Nationals for the Class C altered.
You had just regular guys, some guys from the community helping you with the '57
Right.
Ford, but with the Thunderbolt, you had to step it up a little bit, and you actually had some
That's right.
crew members then. Tell us
Yes, and interesting story how I met Big John Gabini.
about Gabini.
He was about, maybe like 26 years old, a big Italian fellow. I actually met him in 1962, and he'd been with me on the '57 Ford. I actually met him when Dick Brannon, I think, beat Dave Strickler in a match race at Detroit Dragway, and he was challenged to tear down to make sure he's legal. And there's John. I thought he worked for Brannon. He's standing close to the hood of the car where they're pulling the engine apart. So I get chatting with him. We hit it off. I said, "Oh, you're with Brannon?" He says, "No, I live here in Trenton, Michigan, not far from the track."
Yeah.
So we just chatted. And, you know, he knew that I had the '57, and I got his number. You know, we basically said, "Would you like to come with me, meet down here next weekend?" You know, and he said yes. So that's how I ended up meeting Big John. He was real good with engine building and maintenance, tuning. He had a real ear for it. You know, we did a lot of ear by ear tuning of the carburetors and everything in those days. And plus he's this big guy, you know, so nobody like messed with me. And when we would, I had another fellow, Jim Darga, who I'd met just, I forget where I met Jim, but he was a Chevy man, but he loved going to the drag races. And he was Polish, and we just hit it off as a team. We had so much fun together. And I used to play a lot of pool, shoot pool, and I was pretty decent at it. So when we'd travel, we'd go in these pool halls. Frankly, I'd hustle pool. We'd be traveling, and we'd have the downtime. But with Big John around, nobody messed with. They gave me the nickname Skinny Kenny, because at the time I weighed about 120s. You know, not now. But the point I'm getting at is, so we go in, and it was like a throwback for us to be like Paul Newman in The Hustler, going to a pool hall in a strange town and shooting. At the time, we'd play for just a few bucks or a beer. Nothing big, but it was still fun. So those two guys were with me all through the Thunderbolt days. Big John continued, Jimmy went his way, Big John continued with me part of the way with the Comet until he decided to get married. And of course his fiancee, Kathy, sweetheart of a girl, didn't want him gone every weekend.
Yeah, right. You know, Ken, as you shared your photograph albums with us, I couldn't help but turn some of the pictures over to the backside, and I saw a name on there of one of the people that took a lot of the shots that we saw, and his name was Steve
Merritt.
Merritt.
Steve Merritt was a buddy of mine. We'd go out cruising on Woodward. Good-looking guy. Girls would flock around him, and of course us, so it was a lot of fun. His hobby was photography.
Yeah.
So a lot of the pictures that you see on the Thunderbolt are taken by Steve.
When you're talking about the Thunderbolt, the 57 you towed with a tow bar.
That's correct.
Okay. What about the Tbolt? I know they came with little tabs on the front for a tow bar and everything.
They did. Everybody, I think, thought they would use those tow bar plates.
Yeah.
They were made out of aluminum.
Yeah.
And just bolted on. Almost every Thunderbolt you see, the originals had them.
Yeah.
But we never really used them because, well, Richter had a trailer. And of course I inherited the trailer.
Yeah.
So
Open trailer.
Open trailer.
Yeah.
We just had a Galaxy, my mom's car, that we towed it with.
Wow.
Right. But there is one story that I left out that's sad but important here on the Thunderbolt. Remember I said that for 65, Paul Harvey, they decided, well, let's give Kenny Richter's car. The part I forgot to mention was, out of the 11 originals, as those that study the Thunderbolt know, number 11 was an automatic. Paul Harvey himself actually drove that car, but it didn't do well. Well, when they were picking the car to give me, they said, well, let's give him Paul's car, the automatic. And of course, I was thrilled. I was going to take it out and put a stick in it. And then Paul came along and said, no, Richter's got a better car. Let's give him Richter's car.
Wow.
Well, what they did with the automatic is they decided to sell it to a Detroit guy. And I don't have his name right off the top of my head. But here's what's sad. He raced the car at Motor City, and he'd made some modifications, whether he'd, I don't know what he had done, but he snapped the rear axle at the drive shaft, and the car catapulted end over end at Motor City, and he died.
Wow.
He was killed.
Wow.
And that was always kind of a spiritual thing to me, because that was supposed to be my car.
Could have been your car.
Now, whether it was because of some modifications he made that caused that, or whether it was just that car's time to come apart.
Yes.
You know, because we did not go through these cars fully in those days.
Right.
That came along for all the later guys racing, especially in the 70s.
Yeah. So the 65 U.S. Nationals ends, and there's still a little racing season left to go. What happens to you at that point?
Well, in 65, of course, I was in college. And, you know, the Nationals were Labor Day weekend, and I'd already been up to school in Midland, Michigan. And, you know, so I basically turned the car back in to Bob Ford / Ford Motor Company, and they ended up selling the car, which I could have bought for $2,500, but who had that kind of money in those days? So a fellow by the name of Paul Moody acquired the car, and he raced it in 1966 and beyond under his company name, which was Expressway Golf, and was very successful with the car. What makes that particular Thunderbolt, in my opinion, the most successful of all Thunderbolts is because Len Richter raced it very successful in match race competition, and he won the IHRA Winter Nationals in the car. I had great success with the car in 1965, and then Paul Moody had great success with the car on the NASCAR Grand Stock Circuit in 1966 and beyond. So I don't think there's another Thunderbolt ever in the country. If there is, I'd really like them to come forward and tell me that had that type of success as that particular car. And one thing I want to add that's not known about the Thunderbolt, that Thunderbolt, is that was the number 2 Thunderbolt. Out of these 100, we'd already established that the first 11 went to the drag council members. The first 10 of that 11 were stick shifts. The first car, I believe, went to Dick Brehm. And the second car went to Richter. And how do I know that? Or how can we prove that? Well, they put a decal number, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, in the center of the front windshield at the top, across from what would be the rear view mirror. We've got a picture that, as you can see, that shows that decal as number 2. So that's a very special moment.
Absolutely.
And 3 fellas campaigned that car, all successful.
Yeah, that's cool. That's cool. So you're back in college and
I've
for
turned
the
the car
semester.
into Bob Ford. You know, basically my season ended after Labor Day because I'm in school, which started in August.
So that concludes episode number 2 of the Kenny Vogt story. The Ford Thunderbolt helped to elevate Kenny's recognition as a successful driver. And because of that, the Lincoln Mercury division of the Ford Motor Company came calling for the 1966 season. In episode number 3, we will look at what happened in 1966 when Kenny went crazy about a Mercury Comet.